For recording, this is the Healthy and Sustainable Places course, and we have with us today a very special guest. We have Professor LisaJacksonPulver from the University of New South Wales. Let me start the session by acknowledging country and paying my respects to the elders, both past and present, and the young people now and for the future of the Ngunnawal and other Aboriginal groups that have been part of looking after this land on which we meet. I'm going to ask Lisa to introduce herself, and some of you have had the great privilege to have had a lecture from Lisa before. But today what Lisa is bringing to us for this course is quite a special contribution, because we really need to get our heads around what we can learn from our very strong Indigenous heritage and from our current Indigenous people about sustainability in healthy places. So it's over to you, Lisa, and thank you again for being here. It's my pleasure.
Hi everyone. Now, I think I recognise one or two of you. Can I just get you to whip around the room and give me your first names and what year you're in, what course you're doing, just to get me oriented?
Anita.
Anita.
Yeah, it's my second year, public health, and what was the other question?
Yeah, so you've answered. So you were in my class last year.
Yeah, I think I saw you engage. I think you had long hair.
Yeah,
I asked you to remember better.
I feel like such a star around here. Thank you very much.
I'm Nicole, I'm third year of public health.
Third year public health, and I met you last year. Did I meet you the year before?
I think just last year.
Okay, great. All right, nice to meet you. Again.
I'm Jenny, and it's my second year of public health.
Second year, and ditto last year, you're in my class, or?
I think I did hear a talk from you or something.
Okay, so you want to log on. Yeah. Okay, understood. Thank you.
I'm here in third year of public health.
Okay, and I met you last year?
No, actually, so PT.
Oh, well done you. I bet you're loving Canberra. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I'm really impressed by it. It's a gorgeous place. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Marilyn, final year public health.
Yeah, have I met you before?
No.
You
I was
sure?
the original intake of public health.
Oh, you look brilliant. Yeah. Maybe you just got one in your face.
I do.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
I'm Lara, and I'm second year public health. And I met you last year.
Fantastic. You knew I was going to ask that.
Yeah.
Anything like that. It's nice to meet you.
And I'm Simone, I'm third year public health as well.
And did I meet you last year?
Don't remember if it was last year or the year before. I know, I feel like I've met you before.
Okay.
I feel like, did you come the year before?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been
before last year.
Both years, first year in public health systems policy 1 and 2.
I definitely remember it in one.
Yeah,
I was away for the
so
second one.
forget year one. You know.
I was away for the one, yeah.
Okay. And of course we've got Rob here, and Rob's kindly doing some videoing for our colleagues, which is great. Well, I'm Lisa, and I'm really happy that you've met me before, because then I can talk more frankly in company of friends. And, there's just something real powerful about understanding who people are, what their names are, and how you choose to describe yourself as being a learner in this wonderful, wonderful process of the academy. We always have to acknowledge country and what we're on and why we're here, and really without our environment, we as humanity, I don't know where we'd be, because there is no other place we call home other than this joint. That's the reality of it. So on a spaceship hurtling through space, really, really fast rate, we're consuming all the resources we possibly can. Pretty much we're poisoning every bit of water we possibly can. We're polluting the skies in ways unimaginable, and we're still trying to live a healthy lifestyle. So what I want to cover off today is to attempt to describe the important connections that we as humanity have to our land, to our planet, to our earth, and put that through a series of lenses, Aboriginal specific lenses, because they're the lenses that I hold. I'm a Koori woman. My people come from just across the mountains, Wiradjuri people, so just a little bit west of here. And I've also got other family up on the far north coast of New South Wales. Okay, so I'll attempt to describe as elegantly as I can how I see the world. And I know that when I've talked like this before, and and because it's such a small group, I'll be able to talk quite personally with you. I don't think it matters where you come from this planet. This all has resonance because of who we are, and that we're all women in this group now, and another woman has joined us. I think that has particular resonance to us because we're often considered to be the ones that have the kids, are the nurturers. We're a highly feminised workforce in health and education, or a so-called carer profession. So I think this is an important place for us to begin and start to recognise what is environmental health. So can I have someone read out this slide, please? You'll all have the opportunity, so you may as well get it over and done with early. Thank you.
Those aspects of human health determined by physical, chemical, biological and social factors in the environment. Theory and practice of assessing, correcting, controlling and preventing those factors in the environment that can potentially affect adversely the health of present and future generations.
Okay. Does anyone not agree with what the World Health Organization has said about what they believe environmental health is? All right, good. So let's move on. The WHO defines really clearly not only the absence of disease, but also the presence of well-being. So it's more than being able to biologically recognise something is sick. It's also being able to recognise when something is doing well. And for many of us working in Aboriginal health, we call that holistic health. We call it complete health. We call it social, emotional well-being. We put a lot of labels on it. That's ultimately what we're talking about. When we look at things like environmental change, how do we consider those things when we're thinking through the implications of what environmental change is? I mean, you hear stuff on the radio, you see stuff on the television, you can download 1,000,001 skeptic reports, you can download 1,000,001 reports saying how devastating it is, and the truth is somewhere out there, and I don't think it's in the middle. Okay, I think it's towards one end, and I don't believe it's on the skeptic side. But when we start thinking about country and land, we start to recognise that it's something that has been here for a long, long time now. My ancestors, it's claimed, have been here for 70,000 years. My grandmother used to say, I don't know, been here since time began. It's a bit longer than that, isn't it? Yes, it's a bit longer than that. But once upon a time there were very clear communities that were very connected with other communities. There were lots and lots of journeys and pathway, and country was known. Country was sung to. Country was what nurtured people. Country is what held people. Country is where you came from. Country is where you go to. Country encompasses the land, it encompasses the sky, it encompasses the water. And when we take someone out of one place and plonk them in another, they need to get a reconnoitre of that place they're on, right? And this is the same for absolutely anyone. So how it is we can manage to disregard all of the screams of country when it says the rivers aren't flowing, the skies aren't working the way they should be, we can't go off and fish the kinds of fish that we used to because we've got practices that are unsustainable, then we, as humanity, needs to somehow engage and interact. And as Indigenous peoples, I think we have a very, very important scope and perspective to lend to the whole debate. Now, a few years ago, there were a number of documents that were created, and they're pretty much the first of their kind. The State of the World's Indigenous Peoples. And we'll be reading a few parts from that shortly. But firstly, who are Indigenous peoples? Well, if you've got a belly button, you were born on Earth. Right? That's the general view. If you've got a belly button, you're fine. If you don't, we're worried. But generally speaking, in this huge planet that's got billions and billions and billions of people, about 370 million people are recognised as being Indigenous. There's around about 90 countries where those people live. Each of those Indigenous populations have got a lot of things in common, such as political activism that's been occurring, things around having their land taken away, their dispossessed of language, the highly urbanising populations, their traditional places of being and their keeping places of being moved from under them by ways of mining or deforestation, and things are changing. And when we look at what the Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs said, he says that Indigenous peoples are custodians of some of the most biologically diverse territories in the world. They are also responsible for a great deal of the world's linguistic and cultural diversity, and their traditional knowledge has been and continues to be an invaluable resource that benefits all mankind. Now, when you see the word all there, it doesn't mean the richest Australians or richest people in the world. It means absolutely every single man, woman and child. Is this happening? When you think about it, is this happening? And despite no common definition and the many, many different contexts and many, many different cultures and languages and ceremonies and songs and places of being, there is no one definition of Indigenous that is applied. But I'll get someone to read out this given quotes. What is it?
It is this all-encompassing nature of Indigenous cultures that makes them unique and so different from the cultures of those groups that hold the political, economic and social power in the nation states in which they live.
And this is important to think about. When we look at Australia, we have a definition. Thus, someone read this, please.
An Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander is a person of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent who identifies as an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander and is accepted as such by the community in which he or she lives.
And I have a very important line that follows. This cannot be determined from appearance. But so often when myself or members of my family go to hospital or go to other environments, we usually have to have a bit of a battle to be identified as Aboriginal or to get access to the Aboriginal health workers within the system. Because people have some crazy idea that 230 years of colonisation has not had net impact on how our families are in this day and age. It's obvious I come from a mixed heritage, and I was born and bred and grown up a Koori person, and that is who I am. When we look at land, language, identity and spirituality, good pattern recognises here.
Land is the foundation of the lives and cultures of Indigenous peoples all over the world. This is why the protection of their right to land, territories and natural resources is a key demand of the International Indigenous Peoples Movement and of Indigenous peoples and organisations.
Language is an important component of one's identity. It is fundamental to understanding values, beliefs, ideology, and other intangible aspects of culture. It enables people to communicate at specific peoples and determines participation, access to knowledge, leadership, and depth of understanding.
Another salient characteristic of Indigenous cultures is that they are based on a collective perspective. In the same way that Indigenous peoples consider their lands and resources to be collective assets, they see their cultural values and activities, their identity, as a function of the group, not individuals. This also applies to the ownership and custody of their cultural heritage, which is collective.
And when we start putting that all into perspectives, and when we start to understand what that means, the DIAC has 7 principles that summarise what is it that's important about life and what should it be that we aspire to. The first is sustainability or biodiversity versus productivity or monoculture. The second is collectivity or cooperation versus individuality or competition. Third is naturality or organic versus engineered or inorganic. Fourth is spirituality or rituality versus rationality or scientific. Fifth is process or effectiveness versus result or efficiency. The sixth is subsistence or domesticity versus commerciality or market. Customary law, locality versus state law or global. Now these are really important things to recognise that it's not either or, but at the moment we seem to be in an either or situation. Instead of recognising that there needs to be a balance in the way we need to move forward, in the way that we need to make the system work, so that it's inclusive of everybody, so we can get back to recognising the resources of this planet are the right of all of us and not of a select few. So taking that into account and recognising that there is also spirituality. Next one, please. We'll all get the chance to read.
Indigenous peoples also have a deep spiritual relationship with the land. Therefore, and along with their ancestral territory and feel responsible for the healthy maintenance of the land, its waters and soils, its plants and animals. For both themselves and future generations, land is where their ancestors are buried and where sacred places are visited and referred.
Another minute. It's okay, come to go.
Spirituality defines the relationships of Indigenous peoples with their environment as custodians of the land. It helps construct social relationships, gives meaning, purpose, and hope to life. It is not separated, but it is an integral, infused part of the whole Indigenous worldview.
Indigenous knowledges, traditional wisdoms, social institutions and culture are something that often people talk about, but when it comes to the concrete of what on earth is that, people have some difficulties with. This is quite a long passage. Would someone care to read this out, please?
Indigenous knowledge is embedded in community practices, institutions, relationships, and rituals, and is inextricably linked to Indigenous people's identity, their experiences of the natural environment, and hence their territorial and cultural rights. Indigenous peoples, therefore, place a great deal of importance on passing this knowledge on to future generations, not only for the sake of preserving the knowledge, but also for preserving their own cultures and identities.
When we start looking at how that translates, or perhaps is similar to what happens here in Australia, we've got a fantastic activist in Yunnagar man called Mundaroo. Traditionally, Aboriginal society is based on three major principles. The first of these is a powerful, all-encompassing religion. They believe that Aboriginal children are born of women but conceived of a spiritual source whose font is the land. And to them, the land has two kinds of landscapes. One is physical, which all human beings can view. The other is spiritual, which only they can see. For Aboriginal people, there is only one way to own land, and that is to be conceived of it. Land is a parent. It's a very important principle that prevents any kind of loan or grudge money, which has been the scourge of the rest of the world. This is a very, very important thing to understand, and I put this in here not to annoy people, but to invite people to recognise that since 2008, when the formal apology occurred by the Rudd government to the stolen generations of people, what happened the day before was more significant in the context of this. There was a welcome to country that occurred from elders from all over the country. And that welcome to country welcomed all people, those who come before, those who come now, those who come into the future, to this land, to this place, and therefore conferred belonging here. And that was a significant thing for the Aboriginal people of the day to do, because then, instead of just having a ceremony, a ditch play, a smoking ceremony, and dancing in some bit of language, it was all about exchanging roles and responsibilities and rights. And those rights are now yours, and those rights and responsibilities are now yours. And they are things that we have a shared thing that we need to do now. And so I want people to understand this and take this on as something which is also for you. That welcome to country was the first one that ever happened to the Parliament of Australia, and therefore every single person in this country. And it was a really important thing for us to recognise that now we can move on as a collective who all belongs here together. So it's no longer this us and them thing, it's about us not all together. We have a problem, and only together can we solve it. So for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, the connection with country, place of ancestry, identity, language, livelihood and community is a key determinant of health. Remove people from country or remove country from people and you have got sick people. It's very, very simple. The stats tell us this. There's a life expectancy gap. There's gaps in every single measure you would like to see. It's obvious. If community-owned country becomes sick through environmental degradation, climate impacts or inability of traditional owners to fulfil cultural obligations through ongoing management and habitation of their land, the people of that land will feel sickness themselves, and it doesn't matter if you're an urban blackfella, if you're a remote blackfella or a regional blackfella, this is the truth. And when we start looking at that in the context of science, the NHMRC, Australia's National Health and Medical Research Council, some years ago developed a model around responsibility, reciprocity, respect, equality, survival and protection in its application and review of funding grants from people who are working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. They had to deal with the spirit and integrity of the application in the context of the community. And this is published by our very own National Health and Medical Research Council. Right? So it's a really important, we've gone off and put it into this model here, that is what they're doing. And we saw that as a really important thing that they did, and that they're still working through how to interpret that properly. So when we look at the definition of health, well, what is health? So would someone read this out, please?
Not just the physical well-being of an individual, but the social, emotional and cultural well-being of the whole community in which each individual is able to achieve their full potential as a human being, thereby bringing about the total well-being of their community. It is a whole of life view and includes the cyclical concept of life, death, life.
And I'm sure you've all met that before, right? Okay. Is it making a different level of sense now, the context that we've been looking at with all of the other populations? Okay, that's good. So, when we look at physical health, when we look at well-being and emotional and cultural well-being, social well-being, we also have to look at that whole thing of what is mental health and how does that fit into the whole thing, because not in our definition do we talk about mental health, right? What we do talk about is emotional well-being, and a lot of people link the two things together. There are crossovers, but they are not the same things. Okay? So when we look at what mental health is, we recognise that it's a large cofactor in burden of disease, and some would say the result of a large proportion of preventable mortality and morbidity. According to the Commonwealth Department of Health and Aged Care, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, mental health is defined as the capacity of individuals and groups to interact with one another and to the environment in ways that promote subjective well-being, optimal development, and the use of cognitive and affective and relational abilities. Now, that was done in 1998, that definition. And some would say that was incredibly insightful. When we look in 2012, there's been some additional explanation onto it. A diverse range of social, environmental, biological and psychological factors can impact on an individual's mental health. Where do you think that came from? In turn, people can develop symptoms and behaviours that are distressing to themselves and others and interfere with their social functioning and capacity to negotiate daily life. These symptoms and behaviour may require treatment or rehabilitation or even hospitalisation. So there's been quite a lot of thought over time, and the most important thing here is the naming of environmental, biological and social factors having an impact on people's mental health. Whereas before, it was merely glanced at. Making things concrete can make things actionable. When we look at family wellbeing, for example, what we reckon is that family wellbeing, if you look at an individual, you're treating an individual. If you're looking at a family and you're working with a family, even though there's an individual who's unwell in that, you are looking after a community. And that's really important when we start looking at things like environmental health. And when we look at environmental health, we can see that there are a lot of external factors that can assist people to meet their basic human needs and therefore live in harmony with others. Right? So when we start looking at the collectivism and how it is many of us like to live, or how many of us think, then you start to address needs for the greater good of a bigger whole. Right? Does that make sense? So when we look at the dimensions that this works in, we're looking at physical, mental, social, emotional and spiritual. And when a person's basic needs aren't met, or they get out of balance, then there's a loss of that connectedness to well-being, and it affects every part of someone's life. We call it disempowerment. but that's the reality. It just makes people feel horrible. When we look at what people value about their environment, there's a whole list of things here, and you can have a look at that online, but I'll just pick out a couple of them. People consider their estates or country as being important. They value distinct ecozones, or thick scrub, or rainforest, or dry forest, or flowers, or ferns and grasses. They value distinct marine ecozones, healthy coral reef, home reef, mangroves, estuaries and islands, camping areas and lifestyle, shady casuarina trees, sand dunes, food that's caught or collected or cooked out bush, birds, including edible white pigeons, waters, waterfalls, rivers and creeks, tubers, which are bush medicines, food from story places or sites of significance, seafoods, trees with other uses, totems, story places, relationships, cultural knowledge, spiritual, health, healthy life for younger people, fish habitat, tourism, working in the environment, including monitoring and collecting data on species, etc., and so on and so forth. So when people talk about the environment, they're not talking about keeping things pristine and pure and never touched and never observed or participated in, but they're talking about how we as normal, healthy human beings can interact and engage with our environment away from living in our back mansions and driving our cars on tarred roads. Okay, so this is basically saying, people are saying, for me to be healthy, this is the stuff I need. And this is not just stuff that's from Aboriginal people, this is stuff that's from lots and lots and lots and lots of different people. And it makes sense, right? Here's one, feeling of peace and coolness in the forest. Have you ever done that on a bushwalk? You're really, really hot, and then you suddenly come to this little glade that's just heaven. You know, it's out of nowhere, and it's there. It's just for you. It's really important. So when we start looking at the physical environment, there's a lot that goes on. You know, we have a lot of things that have happened in our environment over the years and things that will continue to go on. And being a public health epidemiologist, you know, sort of like throwing in some infectious agents and some big words, but I won't get you to read this out. But basically the environment acts as an agent, is part of a relationship with the agent and with the host when it comes to any kind of pathogen that affects human health. And it's interesting because when we came to have a close look at what's happening here, it's almost as though since 1788 a particular frame's been put on Australia. Okay, and you're looking at it through rosy pink glasses, the frame's pink, and you see something that is, if you look outside of the frame, not necessarily there. So you see something which might be pristine with a little bit of human habitation, like squiggles along there. But when you know that stuff's going on underground, such as mining or fracking or coal seam gas or other stuff, right? You see the rivers. But what's really happening is that things are breaching out. In some beautiful forests on the central coast of New South Wales, just a few weeks ago, it was discovered that a company who'd been fracking in the area recognised that there were some splits in their process. And so what they did was they tried to bog up the holes, and they bogged up the holes with concrete and a slurry. And it didn't really bog anything. What happened is that the concrete and slurry came out of these cracks, and there is now a river of concrete moving through this pristine walking place on the central coast of New South Wales. Right? That is terrible. And so now everyone's saying, oh gee, we've got to make this big bad mining company clean up the mess. But it's not just a big bad mining company. Big bad mining company does what it does, right? It's mining for gas, because we all want our gas appliances, right? And we all want to have our biofuels, and we all want to do this, that and the other. Who authorised it to happen, and how are we, the people, going to make sure that we collectively clean this up? And on the one hand say, well, you can't mine for this terrible stuff, and then on the other hand, go off and use the resources that that mining company is giving to us as a society. In other words, what part of the cycle are we playing when we start to look in here? You know, what part of the environment, agent, host cycle are we in? Consumers, as users, as people who need to get from A to B and do things. Okay. And so this is a representation, I think, of really what has been happening. You know, things aren't as we hope they are. Things are changing. And changing in some regards for the better, but in a lot of other regards, definitely not for the better. And we have to start thinking very carefully about what we're doing and recognising that when we start looking at the solutions, we have to pay particular attention to those people who don't have the resources to be able to pay for green energy, clean energy, or to be able to live somewhere where you don't need to own a car, or to be able to do things in a way that lets you feel as though you've got a sustainable small footprint, and go poo-poo to people who rely on heavy truck transport to get their fresh veggies in. Okay? So when we look at poor and overcrowded housing and infrastructure in remote Aboriginal communities, for example, the poorest of people have got the most residents in their dwellings. And that's also similar in many other populations, but in the Aboriginal populations it's a significantly higher rate. When we look at people, especially children, living in overcrowded housing and they don't have the basic facilities, this series of graphs from our colleagues at the ABS just basically show that in a different way, that the more remote you are, the more overcrowding you have, but if you're Aboriginal compared to other Australians living in major cities, you're still suffering from overcrowding as a whole. When we look at people who are living with high levels of psychological distress, in every single age category of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, you see that as being very, very high. Now, that is not good for you, living with stress, because if you're living with high levels of stress, you'll go off and you'll do things that are not necessarily nurturing for you or in the best interest of yourself or your family. It's a simple fact. Think about it when you're under stress. What do you do to yourself? Last night I ate away a great big piece of stuff that I shouldn't have eaten, and I paid for it last night because it's just I have a high pressure job at the moment and I'm doing lots of stuff. That's really stupid. It's not good for my health. I was eating and I'm going to regret this in the morning, and it took me about 2 hours to regret it. But yeah, it's just what we do. It's a natural thing to do. It's not about beating yourself up. It's about recognising the role of stress in behaviours and those behaviours impacting and elsewhere. Okay. When we look at psychosocial, emotional and mental health, well-being, security issues, we've got some really interesting stuff that's been stated about the environment here, and I'll read this bit out. It says, scientists define environment in the realm of mental illness broadly, some going as far to suggest it encompasses everything that isn't an inherited gene. That's a departure from traditional thinking in environmental health. However, which has historically viewed environmental threats in the context of infectious agents, pollutants and other exogenous factors that influence the individual's physical surroundings. Environmental threats to mental health include those traditional parameters, along with pharmaceutical and illicit drugs, injuries and nutritional deficiencies, but also consist of psychosocial conditions that relate to an individual's perception of the social and physical world. Does that make sense? There's quite a lot in that.